In 23rd January 1943, the frozen city of Stalingrad was dying, and with it, the last hope of the German Sixth Army. The snow had stopped falling, but the wind still cut like glass. It moved through the skeletal buildings, through the blackened shells of factories and homes, carrying the groans of the dying. Somewhere in that endless white ruin, a tiny shape moved. The slow, shivering crawl of a woman through the snow. Her name was Lieutenant Yelena Morozova, and she had once been a pilot. Now she was a survivor. Hours earlier, the world had been nothing but the thrum of an engine and the smell of oil and canvas. The Polikarpov Po-2, her plane, had been little more than wood and fabric, a fragile thing in a sky filled with steel. Beside her sat her navigator and dearest friend, Irina Sokolova, a girl who still carried the quiet innocence of her pre-war life when she had been a music teacher. Their mission that night was simple on paper, to drop incendiaries on German supply dumps near the Volga River. But in Stalingrad, nothing was simple. The night sky had been filled with tracers, yellow lines of fire climbing like devils into the darkness. A German machine gun found them as they banked for another pass. The Po-2 shuddered. The left wing tore apart, a bloom of sparks and fire bursting from the struts. Yelena barely had time to shout. The world became a whirl of wind, snow, and impact. They hit hard, somewhere beyond the last Soviet trenches. When she woke, there was silence, only the wind. Irina was beside her, dazed but alive, a gash across her temple bleeding into her scarf. The plane was wrecked, half buried in snow, its black canvas torn open like flesh. The fuel had spilled, but miraculously had not caught fire. They were behind enemy lines. Yelena's training came rushing back, not as words, but as instinct. She grabbed the radio beacon, the maps, the flare pistol. Her fingers were already numb, her breath a fog. Irina was slower, still dizzy from the impact. Together they crawled into the shelter of a burned-out half-track nearby, its German insignia barely visible under frost. "We have to move before dawn," Yelena whispered. "They'll come for the wreck." Irina nodded, wiping blood from her eyes. "And go where?" Yelena didn't answer. She didn't know. They moved through the ruins like shadows, past frozen corpses, past the shattered remnants of tanks and men. The city was no longer a city, but a graveyard. The Germans were trapped in their own fortress, encircled by the Red Army, starving, desperate, and dangerous. By morning they found shelter inside what had once been a bakery. The ovens were shattered, the floor littered with burnt loaves and shell fragments. Yelena checked the radio. It was damaged, but not dead. If she could get high ground, maybe, just maybe, she could signal the artillery across the Volga. Irina was trembling. Her fingers had gone pale blue. Frostbite. "We can't stay long," Yelena said softly. "They'll be searching." "But Yelena," Irina whispered, "we're surrounded. Even if we send coordinates, who will hear us?" Yelena looked through a hole in the wall, at the grey, smoke-choked sky. "They'll hear. They have to." That night, they climbed to the upper floors of a ruined factory. Yelena set up the radio, wrapping the wire around a broken girder. Static filled the air. Her hands shook as she adjusted the dials. The signal was weak, distant. Then faintly, a voice crackled through. "This is Red Battery, identify." Her heart leaped. "Night Witch 2-7, she whispered into the mic. "We're down behind enemy lines. Coordinates." She gave them, quickly, precisely. The voice confirmed. Artillery would fire within the hour. Irina smiled weakly, her lips cracked and bleeding. "You did it." Yelena forced a small grin. "No, we did." Then came the sound, faint at first, then rising. German voices. They were coming. The first shell fell minutes later. It screamed through the night, exploding in the distance with a thunderclap that shook the walls. Another followed, and another, until the air itself seemed to burn. Through the chaos, Yelena saw shadows moving in the snow, German soldiers trying to flee the bombardment, shouting to one another, disoriented by the blasts. She aimed the flare pistol and fired, a red signal into the sky. The next salvo landed closer, right on top of the retreating troops. Irina clung to her, whispering prayers. When the barrage finally stopped, the world was silent again, except for the crackling of distant fires. The Germans had pulled back, their pockets shrinking once more. But Irina was no longer moving. The cold had taken her. Yelena sat beside her in the dark, holding her frozen hand, unable to speak. She thought of the nights they had flown together, the laughter in the tents, the smell of fuel, the shared fear. How Irina would hum softly into her headset before every flight, as if to steady her heart. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quietly, gently, like ash from the sky. Yelena picked up the radio one last time. "This is Night Witch 27, she whispered. "Target destroyed, one survivor." Then she turned off the set. She took Irina's scarf and wrapped it around her neck. She stepped into the snow, pistol in hand, and vanished into the white ruins of Stalingrad. Weeks later, when Soviet scouts found the wreck of the Po-2, they discovered two names carved into its wooden fuselage, Yelena Morozova and Irina Sokolova. The last flight of the Night Witches had not been in the air. It had been in the heart of hell, among the ruins, where two women turned a hopeless mission into victory. And somewhere in the darkness of Stalingrad, soldiers swore they sometimes heard the sound of a biplane, S-faint wings, gliding without an engine, whispering through the night like ghosts. In 12th February 1943, the ashes of Stalingrad still smoked, but out of the ruin a new legend began to rise. The news of the two Night Witches spread quickly. No one knew who had first told the story. Perhaps a frontline medic, perhaps a passing courier. But soon, every pilot in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment had heard of the women who stayed behind enemy lines and turned the German pocket into fire. To the Soviets, it was not just bravery, it was proof. Proof that the Germans could be beaten. Proof that even the smallest, weakest aircraft could change the course of a battle. And for Lieutenant Katya Orlova, it was something more personal. Katya sat on the edge of her bunk, tightening the strap on her flight helmet. The airfield near Saratov was half frozen mud, half ice, and the wind never stopped. Around her, engines coughed and sputtered as mechanics worked on their biplanes, the same fragile Po-2s that had haunted German soldiers for months. Her own aircraft bore a new name, painted in white letters on the fuselage, the Widow's Wings. It was in honor of Yelena and Irina, though Katya had never met them. She had joined the regiment only weeks after Stalingrad, and all she knew came from stories whispered around campfires. "They glided over the Volga without engines," one pilot would say. "They bombed a whole German column alone," said another. "Ghosts," someone else muttered. "Real witches." Katya didn't care about ghosts. She cared about revenge. Her husband, Victor, had been a tank driver, killed near Smolensk in 1941. She had buried his photograph in her flight jacket pocket, and every night before takeoff, she touched it once. A quiet ritual. Now, as her navigator, Anya Petrovna, climbed into the rear seat, Katya felt that familiar tightness in her chest. Fear, anger, and the cold all mixed together. "Ready?" Anya asked, her voice small under the roar of the wind. Katya nodded. "Let's show them what the witches can do." Their mission was dangerous. like all of them. A German supply line had been re-established west of the Don River. The 508th was to strike the convoys moving through the woods, disrupting ammunition and food deliveries to the retreating 6th Army remnants. It was deep night when they took off. The Po-2's engine buzzed softly, a thin sound against the vast silence of the Russian sky. The moonlight turned the snow below into silver. They flew low, barely 50 meters above the ground, navigating by rivers and roads, their compasses unreliable in the cold. Katya kept her eyes on the horizon, a dark ribbon of forest ahead. Then, as planned, she cut the engine. The sudden silence was terrifying, only the whisper of the wind through the wires. The plane glided, slow, ghostly, over the treetops. Below she saw lights, a convoy of trucks, their headlights faintly yellow under blackout covers. Soldiers huddled by campfires, unaware that death was already circling above them. Anya leaned forward, whispering, "Bombs armed." Katya pulled the release lever. 2 small bombs dropped. The plane barely shuddered. Seconds later, twin explosions ripped through the dark. Fire blossomed among the trees. The Germans scattered, shouting, firing wildly into the night sky. Their tracers streaked upward, bright and aimless. Katya banked sharply, gliding away, still without engine power. Then, with practiced timing, she restarted it, the propeller sputtering to life. 2 direct hits, Anya said, laughing breathlessly. Right on target. But Katya didn't smile. She was looking down at the fire spreading through the forest, at the chaos below. Somewhere among those men, she thought, were the same kind who had killed Victor. For a brief, dangerous second, she almost turned back for another run. But then she stopped herself. That wasn't the mission. "Save your hate," she whispered. "Use it when it counts." They returned to base at dawn. The air was sharp with frost, the horizon glowing pale pink. Mechanics rushed to refuel and rearm the planes as the pilots trudged to the mess tent for tea and bread. Inside, a message awaited them, handwritten, pinned to the bulletin board. "To the brave aviators of the 588th Regiment, your courage at Stalingrad has inspired all of Russia. Fly proud, fly silent. The night witches will haunt our enemies forever. Marshal Rokossovsky." Katya stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was neat, official. The words seemed distant, too big for the muddy airfield and the exhausted faces around her. But as she looked at her fellow pilots, the young women laughing through cracked lips, brushing snow from their hair, clutching tin mugs with trembling hands, she understood. They were tired, cold, afraid, and still they flew. The ghosts of Stalingrad lived on in them. That night, before the next mission, Katya stood alone beside her plane. The stars were bright, hard points of light in the black sky. She took Victor's photo from her jacket, kissed it once, then tucked it back inside. Then she looked at the white letters on the side of her Po-2, the Widow S wings. "You'll see me up there," she whispered. "You'll see us all." She climbed into the cockpit, pulled down her goggles, and gave a small salute to the empty sky. Moments later, the engine coughed to life, and the wooden biplane rolled down the icy runway. As it lifted into the dark, the sound of its little engine faded, replaced by the eerie silence of gliding wings. And somewhere far ahead, over German lines, the soldiers once again heard that sound they had come to fear most, the whisper of witches in the night. In 3 March 1943, the snow fell so thick that the sky and earth became one, and even the stars seemed to disappear. The night began like any other, a simple bombing run, 2 targets near the German supply route east of Kursk. The plan was to strike and return before dawn. Nothing unusual, nothing heroic, But war never stayed simple for long. Lieutenant Katya Orlova and Anya Petrovna climbed into their small wooden biplane, the Widow's Wings, engines sputtering in the freezing dark. Their uniforms were thin, the cockpit open to the wind. Every mission risked frostbite, or worse. Katya touched the photo of her husband Victor, tucked inside her jacket. Then, with a nod to the ground crew, she throttled up. The plane leapt forward into the storming night. Within minutes, they were swallowed by snow. The ground vanished, the horizon disappeared. Only white, endless white. "Can you see the river?" Katya shouted over the wind. Anya peered through her goggles. "No landmarks, compass says east, but—" She paused, tapping it with her finger. "It's spinning again." The magnet in their old compass had frozen and cracked. Without it, they were blind. Katya tried to keep the plane steady, wings trembling against the gusts. "Keep your eyes sharp. If we lose the river, we lose home." Minutes turned to hours. The Po-2 rattled in the storm, its wooden frame creaking. Fuel ran low. Finally, through the veil of snow, they saw something. Faint lights below. "An airfield?" Anya said. "Could be ours," Katya replied. "Or theirs." It was a gamble, but so was the sky. Katya banked lower, descending carefully. The snow thinned just enough for them to see it. Rows of aircraft, tents, fuel trucks, but not Soviet ones. Black crosses on the wings, the Iron Eagle on the hangars. "Germans!" Anya whispered. Katya's stomach turned. They had drifted deep behind enemy lines, and they were running out of fuel. "Cut the engine," she said quietly. Anya stared. "What?" "Cut it. Glide past. We'll land beyond the forest." Anya obeyed. The hum of the propeller died, replaced by the ghostly whistle of air rushing past their wings. They glided silently over the enemy base, a trick every night witch knew well. Below, soldiers moved like ants, unaware that death was drifting just above them. Katya steered for the tree line. The plane skimmed over the snow, touched down roughly, and slid to a stop in a shallow drift. For a long moment neither woman spoke. Only their heavy breathing filled the frozen stillness. Then Anya whispered. "We're alive," Katya nodded. "For now." They covered the plain with branches and snow, camouflaging it in case German patrols came searching. Then they began walking, hugging the forest's edge, trying to find their bearings. But fate had other plans. Through the trees, Katya noticed movement. Not far away, a patrol of German soldiers, maybe 6 of them, trudging along a path. She grabbed Anya's arm, pulling her behind a fallen tree. They crouched, holding their breath as boots crunched on the snow nearby. The Germans spoke quickly, their words muffled by the wind. Katya understood only a few phrases. "Stützpunkt, Benzin, Offizier." Anya leaned close, whispering, "They're talking about fuel shipments, maybe for the offensive." Katya nodded. "If we can map this route, command will want it." So they followed. At a distance, careful not to make a sound, the 2 women trailed the patrol through the forest until they reached a clearing. There, hidden from the air, stood a small fuel depot. Dozens of barrels under tarps guarded lightly. Trucks came and went along a narrow path. Anya's breath caught. This could cripple their advance. Katya smiled faintly. Then let's remember every inch of it. They sketched the layout in a small notebook, marking trees, landmarks, even the road direction. But just as they were about to slip away, a German shepherd barked. A guard turned, eyes wide. "Run!" Katya shouted. Bullets tore through the trees as they sprinted into the forest. Snow exploded around their feet. Katya felt one round whip past her shoulder, another slam into a tree inches from her head. They ran until the shouts faded behind them. Panting, they collapsed behind a rock outcrop. Anya's voice trembled. "We'll never make it back in this weather." Katya looked up at the sky, still thick with snow. "Then we'll wait. Night will cover us again." Hours passed. The storm eased. Katya lit a small flare, shielding it with her hand, and studied their notebook. "We're maybe 50 kilometers north of Kursk," she guessed. "If we fly low, hugging the river, we can reach friendly lines before dawn." Anya nodded, though her lips were blue from the cold. They returned to the buried plane, dug it free, and refueled from a spare canister. The Po-2 groaned as the engine turned, then sputtered back to life. Katya climbed in, hands shaking from exhaustion. "Hold tight," she said. "No mistakes this time." They took off, just as the first light touched the horizon. Below them, the forest glowed faintly silver. Behind them, the German base slept, unaware that 2 witches had seen its secret heart. By the time they crossed back into Soviet lines, their fuel was nearly gone, but their notebook was full. Katya handed it to the duty officer as soon as they landed. He flipped through it, eyes wide. This could change everything." She just nodded, too tired to speak. That night, as Katya sat by the fire with Anya, she unfolded Victor's photo again. The edges were worn now, the image faded. "You'd laugh," she whispered. 2 women lost in the snow fighting an army with pencils and paper. Anya smiled faintly beside her. "He'd be proud." Katya stared into the flames. "Maybe. But we're not done yet. There's still more sky left to fly." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, endless, and silent. And somewhere beyond the white horizon, the war rolled on. In full July 1943, the steppe burned red beneath the rising sun. The largest tank battle in history was about to begin. For days, rumors had swept through the airfields, whispers of a German counterattack so vast it would crush the Soviet front in one blow. The officers called it Operation Citadel. The soldiers called it the Storm. Katya Orlova sat on a wooden crate beside her Po-2 biplane, tightening her gloves against the chill. Around her, mechanics moved like shadows, refueling, rearming, and preparing for the night to come. The night witches had flown over Kursk before, but never like this. The entire steppe was bristling with German armor, the feared tigers and panthers, their turrets glinting in the morning light like metal beasts waiting to devour the earth. Katya looked at Anya, who was adjusting the bombs beneath their fragile wings. "How do you fight something made of iron?" she asked quietly. Anya smiled faintly. "With fire and luck." By dusk, the sky turned the color of smoke. The regiment gathered in silence around their commander, Major Raskova. Her voice was calm, steady, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "The Germans are moving north of Belgorod. Their tanks are massed in the thousands. Our task is to harass their supply lines, blind their communications, and burn their fuel depots. You will fly low, glide in silence, and drop your bombs where they sleep." She paused, scanning their faces. "Remember, fear is a luxury we cannot afford. We fly not for glory, but because someone must." The women saluted. No one spoke. Katya climbed into her biplane, heart pounding. She could feel the hum of the little engine through her boots, a heartbeat of its own. They took off in waves, each pair vanishing into the deep blue dusk. As the ground fell away, Katya felt that familiar mixture of terror and freedom. Up here, she was weightless, timeless, untouchable. Below, the German lines stretched endlessly, columns of armor crawling across the land. Every few seconds, a flash from artillery or an anti-air battery cracked through the dark. Anya leaned over, shouting above the wind, "Fuel convoy ahead, near the river!" Katya nodded, cutting the engine. The plane fell into silence. The wind became their only sound. Like ghosts, they glided through the night. She could see the target now, trucks, tents, rows of barrels glinting faintly in the moonlight. German guards smoked cigarettes, unaware that death was drifting above them. "Now," Katya hissed. Anya released the bombs. The first explosion tore through the camp like thunder. Fire bloomed across the convoy, painting the sky orange. Trucks burst like matchsticks. Men shouted, running for cover. Katya pulled the nose up sharply, the biplane shuddering as shrapnel whistled past. Then, the unmistakable bark of a machine gun below. Tracer rounds streaked upward, bright as meteors. "Hold on!" she shouted, twisting the plane hard to the left. Bullets ripped through the canvas wings, one grazing her arm. They barely cleared the treetops. When they finally leveled out, Anya checked her friend's sleeve, a red stain spreading fast. "You're hit!" "It's nothing," Katya lied, teeth clenched. "We still have work to do." Anya tore a strip from her scarf and tied it tight around the wound. "You always say that." Katya gave a tired smile. "Because it's always true." As they circled back, smoke from the burning convoy drifted high, glowing like a beacon. But then something new appeared on the horizon, a moving wall of metal. German tanks, dozens of them rolling toward the front. Anya's eyes widened. "They're advancing tonight." Katya gripped the stick tighter. "Then we hit them tonight." She brought the plane around, diving low, the freezing air biting her face. The ground blurred beneath them, fields, trenches, wrecks of old vehicles. The Tigers moved slowly, their armor gleaming like stone. Katya knew their bombs couldn't pierce those monsters, but the fuel trucks behind them, that was another story. She aimed for the rear of the column and dropped the last of their explosives. The blast lit up the plane like sunrise. Flames swept across the supply wagons, engulfing several tanks in a chain of secondary explosions. But the light gave them away. An entire battery of anti-aircraft guns opened fire. Tracer fire tore through the night. The Po-2 jolted violently. One wing hit, part of the frame splintering. "Katya!" Anya screamed. "I've got it! I've got it!" The plane bucked, dipped, then steadied. Barely. Smoke poured from the left side. The controls felt heavy, sluggish. Katya scanned the ground desperately. A river, a road, anything flat enough to land on. "There! Open field!" Anya pointed. Katya angled toward it. The biplane skimmed the treetops, skidded across the snow, and finally came to rest in a cloud of dust and steam. Silence. The two women sat still, hearts pounding. Then Katya began to laugh. Shaky, breathless laughter. "We're alive again," she said softly. Anya leaned back, staring at the stars. "You say that like it's a surprise." Hours later, they were found by a Soviet patrol. The commander who debriefed them could hardly believe their report, a two-woman biplane striking at an armored division in the middle of the night. When he asked how they managed it, Katya just smiled faintly. "With timing," she said, "and a little bit of madness." The next morning, as the sun rose over the battlefield, Katya stood beside the wreck of her plane. The front was a sea of smoke and fire. The German offensive had begun, and so had the Soviet defense. Somewhere in the distance, artillery boomed. Anya came up beside her, holding a mug of bitter coffee. "Think we'll make it through this one?" Katya looked toward the horizon, where hundreds of black dots filled the sky. More aircraft, more night witches. "If we don't," she said quietly, "we'll haunt them forever." The roar of engines filled the morning air. The witches were flying again. In 22nd January 1943, the Volga River was frozen solid, and Stalingrad had become a graveyard of steel and snow. The cold was beyond human comprehension, not just a chill, but a living, suffocating thing that clawed through flesh and bone. The ruins of the city looked like a skeleton picked clean, each building a shattered ribcage jutting against a grey sky. Katya Orlova stood on the edge of an improvised airstrip, little more than packed snow beside the river. Around her, the last surviving Po-2 biplanes of the 588th Regiment idled, their engines wheezing in protest against the ice. She had seen everything by now. Firestorms, starvation, the sky itself split open by war. Yet what awaited tonight was different. This mission wasn't about dropping bombs, it was about ending the nightmare. In her coat pocket, Katya carried a folded map marked with a single, crucial set of coordinates. The position of the German command center, trapped in the Kessel, surrounded by Soviet forces. If the Red Army could target it precisely, the last German resistance in Stalingrad would collapse. But the only way to deliver those coordinates was to fly through the city, through blizzards of flak and tracer fire, and signal them by flare from above. She knew what that meant. No one came back from a flight like that. Anya limped toward her, her leg still bandaged from the crash weeks before. "They can find another pilot," she said. "You've done enough, Katya." Katya smiled faintly, shaking her head. They need someone who's seen the city from above, someone who can still find her way through the smoke. "You mean someone willing to die for it?" Katya looked out over the frozen river where distant flashes lit up the horizon. If it means no one else has to, then yes. For a long time they stood in silence. Two women who had survived the impossible too many times. Finally, Anya pressed something into her friend's hand, a small, dented pocket compass. "It doesn't always point north," she said softly. "But it's been lucky." Katya smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then I'll take it where luck still matters." By 2300 hours, the city was a living hell. Columns of smoke coiled into the clouds. Searchlights swept the sky. Every window and crater below spat orange fire. Katya's Po-2 struggled against the wind, its wings creaking under the strain. She could barely see 10 meters ahead, just the dim outline of the ruined city beneath her. The radio crackled with a single instruction from command. "Confirm coordinates over target zone. Fire flares and withdraw." Withdraw. The word almost made her laugh. Below her, the German lines were in chaos. Tanks lay frozen in the streets, their crews dead from the cold. Soldiers huddled in basements, praying to gods who no longer listened. And then, the familiar whine of machine gun fire. Tracers ripped past her wings. Katya banked sharply, her breath catching. The plane rattled violently, one strut splintering, fabric tearing loose. She pulled up, heart pounding. The flak was thick now, hundreds of shells bursting around her like fireflowers in the snow. Each one painted the sky in blinding light. Through it all, she saw it, the ruined factory that intelligence had marked as the German headquarters. A blackened, skeletal structure, surrounded by tanks and sandbags. "This is it," she whispered. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the flare gun. She could barely feel them. They were numb, stiff with frostbite. She aimed out the cockpit window, pulled the trigger, and a bright red flare arced upward, slicing through the smoke like a blood-stained comet. Seconds later, the horizon lit up with returning fire, the first wave of Soviet artillery. The earth shook, buildings crumbled, and the German stronghold vanished in a storm of dust and flame. Katya's mission was complete. Now she just had to make it home. The plane was dying beneath her. The engine sputtered, the controls stiff, black smoke poured from the nose. She tried to climb, but the Po-2 had no strength left. It dipped lower, shuddering violently. The compass Anya had given her rolled off the dashboard and landed in her lap, its needles spinning wildly, pointing nowhere. Katya smiled faintly. "It's all right," she whispered. "We're done." Below, the frozen Volga shimmered like glass. She guided the plane toward it, leveling out just above the surface. The wheels touched down, skidding, then snapping off as the fuselage slid across the ice. For a moment, all was still. Then, slowly, the biplane tilted to one side, smoke curling from the broken engine. Katya unbuckled her harness. Every bone in her body screamed, but she forced herself to crawl out, dragging her aching limbs into the night air. The cold was unbearable, sharp as knives, but the stars were beautiful. She lay on the ice, staring upward. From somewhere far away, she heard the rumble of victory guns. Stalingrad was falling, not to the Germans, but to the living, to the stubborn, to those who refused to die. Her breath grew slower. Her hands loosened around the compass. For a brief moment, she thought she saw other figures moving in the dark. Women in flight jackets, their faces lit by moonlight. The night witches, waiting for her. Katya smiled one last time. Then she closed her eyes. When the Red Army recovered her body days later, they found her frozen beside her plane, her hand clutching the flare gun, her map still tucked in her jacket. The commander who read her report said only one thing. She fought the war her way, in silence and in fire. Epilogue. Years later, a museum in Moscow would display a battered compass with a note beneath it. Carried by Lieutenant Katya Orlova, 588th Night Bomber Regiment. Used on her final mission over Stalingrad 1943, the compass did not point north, but it never failed her.